Hello, this is Barbara. I'd like to welcome you to my new YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be making a card with the Lasting Lilly StampIn Up stamp set. For this card, I'm going to start by using a purple ColorBox ink pad. This is a drier ink pad, and I found with this stamp set, you have to use a drier pad because it's so smooth. The details are very finely etched. And because of that, if you're using a wetter ink pad, it'll leave a splotchy looking image. Today I'm going to be stamping 3 stamps on this circle, 1 of the large lilies and 2 of the small ones. Next, I'm going to use my green Tim Holtz Distress Oxide ink to stamp the stems. The set comes with 2 stems. There's a larger one for the large lily, and then a small one with leaf for the smaller lily. After stamping the stems, I'm going to use the large leaf stamp. And this one has a thin end and a thick end. The thick end goes at the bottom of the stem, and the thin end points at the top. And I'm going to stamp that a couple of times to just give a little bit of shape to this. And then I'm going to turn it around upside down and use the bottom of the stamp as a stem and leaf for the remaining flower. And I'm using a baby wipe to clean my stamp. Next, I'm going to add some color to the edge of my circle. I was going to use the same purple ink that I had used for the flower, but then I decided I'd like to get out my Distressed Oxide ink and try that one instead. The shade of purple I'm using is Wild Violet. And if you're wondering which green I was using before, that is the Pilled Paint color. So I'm taking my brush and I'm just stimpling some color around the edges. I use 4 brushes for my Distressed Oxides. This is my red one, and I use my red brush for purples, reds, and oranges. I should have probably used my blue brush, but oh well. Now I'm going back to the purple ColorBox ink that I had used for the flowers. I decided the purple from the Distressed Oxides was just a little darker than I wanted, and so I'm using the lighter purple to smooth that out and give it a softer color. Next, I'm using a different kind of ink to ink the edge. This is a Distress ink, which is a dye ink, unlike the other Distress Oxides I've used, which are a pigment ink. And that one is called Antique Linen, and it just wasn't showing up as dark as I wanted it to. So I decided to switch to the Vintage Photo Distress ink, which is more of a brown color. If you don't know the difference between dye inks and pigment inks, a dye ink is one that actually dyes the paper, whereas a pigment ink will sit on top of the paper. Pigment inks tend to be a little bit brighter, and they show up really nicely on darker colored pages. I've mentioned before that I don't have a lot of stamping supplies yet, and I don't intend to get a bunch of them. And so you see in this video I'm using several different types of ink because I'm just using what I have and making it work. This is a simple card that I'm making. The entire card is only using 1 sheet of cardstock paper. I even have a little paper left over because this card only took about 2/3 of the sheet. The paper I'm using is Georgia Pacific paper that I bought at Walmart, so nothing fancy. To decorate the background, I started off by using the same purple that I stamped the flowers with. And now I'm using the Antique Linen Distressed ink that I used to ink the edge of the card, the one that was a little lighter than I wanted. But I think for the sides here, it's nice and subtle, and it blends in really nice with the purple. I've removed my stamps from my acrylic block, and I'm putting a little bit of ink from my 3 ink colors: the Antique Linen Distressed ink, the purple, and the green Distressed Oxides. I'm picking up some paint with my water brush and squeezing out enough water so that when I tap the brush, the paint will splatter over the background. I just like the texture that this adds. It takes the card from being kind of solid and a little dull. It makes it pop a little bit more. And I'm having some trouble getting the brown, the antique linen to pick up. So I'm going to clean off my acrylic block and add a little bit more ink to it and try again. That's a little better. It's a light color, so it's not going to show up a whole lot. I'm not sure what brand my water brush is. If I can find out, I will post that in the description below. Now I'm cleaning off my acrylic block because I just don't want the paint to dry on it. And we're almost done with the card. I'm going to take some foam adhesives and put them on the back. You can use any brand for this. Adding a dimensional texture to a card is a really nice way to give it some depth and adds visual interest. While I was working on this card, the flowers just didn't look the way I wanted them to. So I decided to take my water brush and move the ink around a little bit. The ColorBox ink that I was using is a pigment ink that sits on the paper, and it's also water-based. And so by wetting it, I can slide the color around. And you can see as I work on it that it's going a little bit darker. It's not as pale anymore, and it has a little bit of a smoother look. I'm really not sure why this didn't stamp as well as my original card. So we're just going to go in and real quickly smooth out the color for each of the flowers. And now that I've smoothed it out, it's not as... I like how much brighter the card is now, but when I moved the paint around, I lost a lot of the details that the stamp had originally. So I'm using a white Uniball gel pen, and I'm tracing over the edge of the petal where the white line was originally, and I'm tracing the middle as well. Then I decided that it would look nice to add some of the details to the back of the petals that were originally there. And so I'm drawing really quick, and the pen's skipping a little bit, but it's giving a little bit of a subtle line. It's just going to add a little pop back to my picture. Now it's time to add the ribbon. I'm just going to tie a little bow, and I was so happy that I had this green in my ribbon box, as it looks really nice with the stems. And while I was cutting the ribbon, I realized these scissors are not any good for ribbon. In the future, I need to remember to pull out my sewing scissors from the closet. See what I mean? I just keep cutting and cutting and cutting, and those fuzzies just aren't coming off the edge. At this point, my camera stopped recording for some reason, so oh well, that's okay. I'd forgot to get my glue anyway, so I went and grabbed my glue, and we'll add the ribbon to the card. This is a Tombow liquid glue that I'm using, and I really like this one because it has a pointy pen tip, so you can get a small little bit on when you want to. And it goes on wet, and you can reposition your paper for a second, but then when it dries, it's permanent. In my sample card, I hadn't added a sentiment yet, and I really wanted to put one on this card. And so I took a little bit of my green Oxide ink and thought I would paint "Thank You" by hand. A lot of my cards are going to end up being thank you cards because that's the kind I find that I use the most. And as I was painting this, it wasn't looking good. I've done some painting before, but the brush I'm using is too large, and while I love these water brushes, as I was painting, a little more water started coming out than I intended. So each letter is getting a little bit more blurry as it goes. Oh well, I'll go ahead and finish it and see what happens. The more I messed with this card, the less I liked how the sentiment looked. After I stopped recording this video, I went and got one of my little tag die cuts out and cut a little tag to put on the card instead. I then used a thank you stamp that I have and stamped it on the tag with the same purple ink that I used for the flowers. The green paper is left over from the card that I made a few days ago with the same Lasting Lily set. Here is my sample and the card from today side by side. When I saw them together, I realized the reason the ink didn't work as well as I expected today was because I used a different kind. Oh well, no one's going to see them side by side, I guess other than you. Well, there's my second card how-to. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked this video, give me a thumbs up, and I look forward to making some more.